One Knock Changed Christmas, presented by Plot Twist Playlist. The silence of the Wisconsin Northwoods was not peaceful. It was heavy, a physical weight that pressed against the eardrums. It was the silence of a world holding its breath before a scream. Elara checked her phone for the 50th time in 10 minutes. The screen was a black mirror, reflecting her own wide, terrified eyes. Dead battery. The GPS had been spinning in confused circles for the last hour anyway, unable to reconcile the dense canopy of pine and spruce with the satellite's sterile map. "Smart move, Elara," she whispered, her voice cracking in the frigid air. "Brilliant strategy." Q4 performance review. Failed to survive the weekend. She was 34, the vice president of brand strategy for a boutique agency in Chicago. She spent her days orchestrating the emotional manipulation of millions, selling the idea of Christmas, the warmth, the nostalgia, the connection, while living a life of takeout containers and empty apartments. This trip was supposed to be a corrective measure, a tangible reclamation of the childhood she had packaged and sold but no longer possessed. She had wanted a tree, not a pre-lit, perfectly symmetrical artificial spruce from a catalog, but a real one she cut down herself, smelling of sap and struggle. Now it was December 19th. The sun had dipped below the tree line hours ago, leaving the woods in a bruised twilight that was rapidly fading into absolute black. And the snow had started. It wasn't the gentle, cinematic dusting she had used in the Home for the Holidays campaign last year. This was aggressive. The wind howled, a low, mournful sound that tore through her expensive wool coat as if it were tissue paper. The temperature was dropping with the terrifying speed of a stone falling down a well. She stumbled, her boot catching on a hidden root. She fell hard, the borrowed axe flying from her grip and disappearing into a drift. The cold bit in her palms, sharp and shocking. When she tried to stand, her legs felt like lead. Hypothermia. She knew the signs from a survival article she'd skimmed for a client pitch on outdoor gear. Confusion, drowsiness, loss of coordination. "I'm going to die here," she thought, the realization arriving with a strange, detached calm. "I'm going to die looking for a Christmas tree, and they won't find me until the spring thaw." She forced herself up. "Move. Just keep moving." She walked blindly, one foot in front of the other, the wind whipping her hair across her face, blinding her. The world was a swirling vortex of white and gray. And then she saw it, a square of yellow. It was faint, flickering, but unmistakably artificial. A window. Adrenaline, hot and desperate, flooded her system. She pushed through a thicket of brambles that tore at her coat, stumbling into a small clearing. There, huddled against the base of a looming ridge, was a cabin. It was dilapidated, the logs gray with age, the roof sagging under the weight of the snow. But smoke, glorious gray smoke, was torn from the chimney by the wind. She didn't run. She couldn't. She shambled to the door and pounded on the rough wood with a fist she could no longer feel. "Hello," she screamed, though the wind swallowed the sound. "Please, help me." Nothing happened. She pounded again, harder, panic rising in her throat. "Please." The door didn't open so much as it was unsealed. It cracked inward, held by a heavy chain. A slice of face appeared in the gap, one suspicious, dark eye, a thicket of gray beard, and deep, etched lines of irritation. "Go away," a voice rasped. It sounded like gravel grinding together. "I'm lost," Elara stammered, her teeth chattering so hard she bit her tongue. "My car, the snow, please." "Not a hotel," the man grunted. He started to close the door. Elara jammed her boot into the gap. It was an instinct born of 1,000 boardroom battles where the door was closing on a deal. "I will die out here," she said, staring into that single dark eye. "If you close this door, you are killing me. Is that what you want for Christmas?" The eye narrowed. For a long, agonizing moment, the man didn't move. Then, with a heavy sigh that seemed to carry the weight of the entire winter, the chain rattled. The door swung open. "Get in," he muttered, "before you let all the heat out." Elara stumbled over the threshold and collapsed onto the rough-hewn floorboards. The heat hit her like a physical blow, the smell of wood smoke, stale coffee, and old dust. "Don't bleed on the rug," the man said. He turned his back on her and walked toward a cast-iron stove that dominated the center of the room. Elara lay there for a moment, just breathing. She looked at her savior. He was tall, but stooped, wearing flannel that had been washed until the pattern was a ghost, and heavy work boots. He moved with a stiffness that spoke of old injuries and older grudges. "I'm Elara," she managed, pushing herself into a sitting position. The man didn't turn around. He was poking the fire with a violent intensity. Didn't ask, "What's your name?" He stopped poking. He stood straight, the firelight casting his shadow long and distorted against the far wall. "Silas." The first night was a study in hostility. Silas gave her a blanket that smelled of mothballs and pointed to a lumpy sofa in the corner. He offered no food, no water, and certainly no comfort. He sat in a rocking chair by the fire, whittling a piece of wood with a knife that looked sharp enough to shave with, ignoring her completely. Elara, once the shivering subsided, found her annoyance rising. She was used to being catered to, or at least acknowledged. "Do you have a phone?" she asked. "Or a radio? I need to call someone." "Lines are down," Silas said without looking up. "Cell towers don't reach this deep in the hollow. You're stuck. For how long?" "Until the plow comes. If it comes." "If?" Alara's voice rose an octave. "What do you mean, if?" Silas finally looked at her. His face was a map of hard terrain, weather-beaten skin, a nose that had been broken at least once, and eyes that were flat and cold. County Road is 5 miles out. They don't prioritize the spur roads, especially not for one old man who doesn't pay his taxes on time. "This is ridiculous," Elara snapped, her executive persona trying to assert control over a situation that had none. "I have a flight to New York on the 23rd. I have a campaign launch on the 27th. I cannot be trapped in a cabin in the middle of nowhere." Silas snorted. It was a dry, humorless sound. "Tell it to the storm, lady. See if it cares about your campaign." He stood up, blew out the kerosene lamp, and retreated to a back room, slamming the door. Elara was left in the dark, the only light coming from the dying embers of the stove. Outside, the wind screamed like a banshee battering the walls. She pulled the mothball-scented blanket up to her chin and cried, quietly, until she fell into a restless sleep. Morning brought no relief. The light that filtered through the grime-streaked windows was gray and diffuse. The snow was piled halfway up the glass. Elara woke to the sound of Silas cursing. She sat up, stiff and aching. Silas was hunched over a large, greasy machine in the corner of the kitchen area. The cabin was noticeably colder than it had been the night before. "What's wrong?" she asked, rubbing her arms. "Generator," Silas spat. "Piece of junk. Died in the night. No power for the well pump. No water." He kicked the metal housing. It clanged dully. Elara stood up and walked over. She knew nothing about engines, but she knew about systems. She knew about diagnostics. "Kicking it usually doesn't work. Have you checked the intake?" Silas glared at her. "I've been fixing engines since before you were born, girl. The carburetor is gummed up. It's finished. Do you have the manual?" "The what?" "The manual. The book that tells you how it works." Silas gestured vaguely to a pile of yellowing newspapers and magazines in the corner. "Buried in there somewhere. Haven't looked at it in 20 years. Elara went to the pile. She dug through decades of Field and Stream and Reader's Digest until she found a grease-stained booklet. She dusted it off. "Okay," she said, opening it. "Let's look at the troubleshooting guide." "Waste of time," Silas grumbled, turning away to look out the window at the wall of white. "Silas," Elara said, her voice sharp, "I am thirsty. I am cold. And I am not going to sit here and freeze because you're too stubborn to read instructions. Now come here." Something in her tone, perhaps the sheer audacity of ordering him around in his own house, made him pause. He turned back, his jaw set, but he walked over. For the next 2 hours, they worked. It wasn't a smooth collaboration. Silas was impatient, prone to swearing and throwing wrenches. Elara was persistent, reading the diagrams aloud, forcing him to slow down and check the connection she pointed out. "It says here the fuel filter might be blocked," Elara read. "Where is that?" Silas pointed with a grimy finger. "There, But I checked it last month. Check it again. He grumbled, unscrewed the cap, and pulled out the small mesh screen. It was caked with black sludge. He stared at it. Well, I'll be damned. He cleaned it with a rag and some gasoline. He reassembled the part. He pulled the starter cord. The engine coughed, sputtered, and then roared to life. The hum of the refrigerator kicked in. The lights flickered on. Silas stood back, wiping his hands on his pants. He looked at the generator, then at Elara. He didn't smile, but the lines around his eyes softened by a fraction of a millimeter. Lucky guess, he muttered. Process of elimination. Elara corrected, feeling a strange surge of pride. Now, can we make coffee? The blizzard did not let up. It raged for 3 days. December 20th, 21st, 22nd. The world outside ceased to exist. There was only the cabin, the fire, and the two of them. They fell into a rhythm born of necessity. The generator needed fuel, which meant venturing out to the shed. The wood stove needed feeding, which meant bringing in logs from the porch. The food needed rationing. Silas's pantry was a testament to a man who didn't care if he lived or died. Cans of beans, a bag of rice, some dried venison, and a jar of instant coffee. This is it, Elara asked on the third night, staring at a bowl of plain rice. Don't you have, I don't know, spices? Salt? Food is fuel, Silas said, shoveling rice into his mouth. Doesn't need to taste good. Everything needs to taste good. It's what makes life bearable. Elara got up and rummaged through the cupboards. She found a forgotten bottle of hot sauce and a tin of cinnamon. She sprinkled the cinnamon on the rice. Silas watched her with skepticism. You're ruining it. Try it. He took a hesitant bite. He chewed slowly. Weird, he concluded, but he finished the bowl. That night, the wind died down slightly, leaving a heavy, muffled silence. They sat by the fire. The hostility had dulled into a wary truce. Why were you out there? Silas asked suddenly. City girl like you, dressed like a catalog model, wandering around the Northwoods in a storm. Elara looked into the flames. I wanted a tree. You can buy trees in the city. They sell them on street corners. I know. I sell them on street corners. Or I sell the ads that make people buy them. She wrapped her hands around her mug of coffee. I wanted it to be real. I remember, when I was a kid, my dad used to take us out. We'd trudge through the snow for hours. It was miserable, usually. My toes would freeze. But when we found the one and we cut it down and dragged it back, it felt like we earned it. It felt like magic. She laughed bitterly. I haven't felt magic in a long time. I just feel tired. I thought if I did the action, the feeling would come back. Silas was silent for a long time. He picked up his whittling knife again. Magic's a lie, he said softly. It's just something we tell ourselves to get through the winter. Why do you hate it? Elara asked. Christmas. You didn't even have a wreath on the door. Silas stopped whittling. He looked at the knife in his hand. My wife, Martha, she loved Christmas. Went crazy for it. Baking, decorating, singing those damn songs. He swallowed hard, the Adam's apple bobbing in his throat. She died 3 years ago, December 23rd, aneurysm. Just dropped in the kitchen while she was icing cookies. The silence in the room deepened, heavy and sad. I'm so sorry, Silas, Elara whispered. I buried her on Christmas Eve, he said, his voice rough. Came back here, took down the tree, threw out the decorations. Haven't celebrated since. Don't see the point in celebrating a day that took everything from me. Elara looked at him, really looked at him, and saw not a grumpy hermit, but a man hollowed out by grief, protecting his wound by freezing the world out. It didn't take everything, she said gently. You're still here. Am I? Silas asked. He stood up and walked to the window, staring out at the blackness. The next day, December 23rd, the sun finally broke through. The world was blindingly white, buried under 4 feet of snow. We need to clear the vents, Silas said at breakfast, and check the propane tank. They went outside. The air was crisp and clean, sharp enough to cut the lungs. Elara felt a strange exhilaration. She was wearing a pair of Silas's old wool socks and an oversized flannel shirt over her clothes. She looked ridiculous, and she didn't care. Silas taught her how to walk in the deep snow, lifting the knees high, placing the foot flat. He showed her how to knock the snow off the roof rake without bringing an avalanche down on her head. "You're not useless," Silas grunted as she successfully cleared a section of the roof. "High praise," Elara grinned. "Don't let it go to your head." As they worked, Elara spotted a small spruce tree near the edge of the clearing. It was stunted, slightly crooked, half buried in a drift. "That one," she said, pointing. Silas looked. "That's a Charlie Brown tree if I ever saw one. Runt of the litter. It's perfect." Elara waded over to it. She looked back at Silas. "Can we? Please?" Silas looked at the tree, then at Alara's hopeful face. He sighed a puff of white steam. He pulled a small folding saw from his pocket and tossed it to her. "You cut it. You carry it." Elara sawed through the trunk. It was hard work, harder than she expected. Resin stuck to her gloves. But when the tree finally tipped over, she felt a surge of triumph that no marketing award had ever given her. She dragged it into the cabin. It looked pathetic in the corner, leaning drunkenly against the wall. "We have no decorations," Silas pointed out. "We have imagination," Elara countered. She spent the afternoon improvising. She took strips of aluminum foil from the kitchen drawer and twisted them into icicles. She used the red yarn from Silas's sewing kit to tie bows on the branches. She found an old deck of cards and cut them into star shapes. Silas watched her from his chair, pretending to read a 3-year-old newspaper. But every now and then, Elara caught him glancing at the tree. "It needs a topper," she said, stepping back to admire her work. Silas stood up. He went to the back room, the room he never opened. He was gone for a long time. When he returned, he was holding a small, delicate angel made of stained glass. It caught the firelight and fractured it into 1,000 colors. "Martha made this," he said, his voice tight. "First year we were married." He held it out to Elara. His hand was trembling slightly. "Silas, I can't," Elara said. "It's too precious." "Put on the damn tree, Elara," he said gruffly. "Before I change my mind." Elara took it reverently. She stood on a chair and placed the angel on the crooked top branch. They stood back and looked at it. The foil shimmered. The red yarn popped against the green needles. The glass angel glowed. It was a mess. It was beautiful. "Merry Christmas, Silas," Elara said softly. Silas cleared his throat. He looked at the tree, and for the first time, the ice in his eyes seemed to melt, replaced by a watery sheen. "Merry Christmas, Elara." Christmas Eve was quiet. The storm had passed, leaving the world in a state of suspended animation. They made a feast. Elara found a can of peaches and used flour and lard to make a crude cobbler on the wood stove. Silas opened a bottle of whiskey he had been saving for a special occasion, or perhaps for the end of the world. They sat by the fire, the tree twinkling in the corner. "You know," Silas said, swirling the amber liquid in his glass, "I thought you were a hallucination when you knocked on the door. A ghost of Christmas past come to torment me. I thought you were a serial killer," Elara admitted. "I was planning my escape route. I was going to hit you with a lamp." Silas chuckled. It was a rusty sound, and used but genuine. "You've got grit, city girl. I'll give you that. You fixed the generator. You cleared the roof. You made whatever this cobbler is." "It's rustic," Elara said defensively. "It's not bad," Silas conceded. He took a sip of whiskey. "You going back to the city? When the road's clear?" "I have to," Elara said. The thought of the office, the emails, the endless meetings suddenly felt exhausting. "My life is there." "Is it?" Silas asked. "You seem pretty happy dragging that dead tree through the snow." "I was." Elara looked at the fire. I think I need to make some changes. I've been selling the idea of happiness for so long, I forgot to actually be happy." "Life's too short to be miserable," Silas said. "Took me 3 years to remember that. And a stranger breaking into my house." He reached into his pocket and pulled out the object he had been whittling for days. He handed it to her. It was a small wooden bear. It was rough, the knife marks visible, but it had personality. It looked grumpy, but sturdy. "It's you." Elara laughed, tears pricking her eyes. "Keep it," Silas said, "so you don't forget the Northwoods." Christmas Day dawned bright and cold. Elara woke with a strange sense of peace. They spent the morning drinking coffee and watching the cardinals flit against the white snow. Around noon, A low rumble vibrated through the floorboards. It grew louder, a mechanical grinding that shattered the silence. Silas went to the window. "Plow," he said. Elara's heart sank. It was the sound of rescue, but it felt like an intrusion. They watched as the massive orange truck crested the hill, spraying a plume of snow into the trees. It stopped at the bottom of Silas's driveway. The driver honked, a cheerful, jarring sound. Elara packed her things. It didn't take long. She had nothing but the clothes on her back and the wooden bear. She stood at the door. Silas was standing by the stove, his hands in his pockets. "Well," Elara said. "Well," Silas replied. "Thank you," she said, "for saving my life, and for everything else." "You saved me too," Silas said, his voice low. He looked at the tree, at the glass angel. "I was drowning in this house. You opened a window." He walked over and, awkwardly, stiffly, hugged her. It was a quick, hard embrace, smelling of flannel and wood smoke. "Don't become a stranger," he said, pulling back. "And don't sell any more fake trees." "I promise," Elara smiled. She walked down the driveway to the waiting plow truck. The driver, a cheerful young man in a neon vest, leaned out. "You the missing lady? Folks have been looking for you everywhere." "I'm her," Elara said, climbing into the high cab. As the truck rumbled away, she looked back. Silas was standing on the porch. He wasn't looking at the ground. He was looking at her, and he raised a hand in a wave. Elara waved back until the cabin disappeared behind the trees. She returned to Chicago, but she didn't return to her life. Not really. She quit the agency 2 weeks later. She started a small consultancy helping local artisans market their work. She bought a small place, not in the city, but on the edge of it, where there were trees. And every year, on December 19th, a package would arrive. Sometimes it was a jar of homemade jam, sometimes a pair of hand-knit socks, and always a small, whittled animal. And every year, Elara would drive north, past the city limits, past the suburbs, into the deep, quiet woods, to a cabin where a light was always left on in the window, and where a grumpy old man and a city girl would drink bad coffee and celebrate the magic of a real, imperfect Christmas.